Hello and welcome everyone. It's another episode of the Solo Gamer Podcast. And I am again joined by Taylor, my man.
What's up, guys? What's going on? Good to be back, man. And,
these are a quick little doubleheader. You know, we didn't wait even a whole week. We're right back in the thick of things, and we're still in the Last of Us thick of things.
Yeah, it's got to be fresh in the mind, right?
It does. It needs to be fresh in the mind, and it's been, we had a conversation before we started this that, we really wanted to make an effort to kind of separate all of the noise around this game and like our experience.
What are you talking about?
This game, and it's been difficult to separate that. It really has. I mean, no matter what we say or do, or ignore or choose to separate, it's like it is a big part of it. So, for those of you listening, if you're going crazy because we're talking about stuff that's controversial and we're not talking about any of it outside of the game itself, we're going to take kind of the conversation about all of the craziness going on with the reaction to this game, and we're going to put that at the end of this show. Taylor and I just want to focus on the game to start, like our reaction, our spoiler cast, our analysis, and then we'll definitely acknowledge and discuss a little bit at the end everything else that's going on, because it's we got to find a middle ground between letting it be too powerful and overshadowing this incredible game and just ignoring it, which is not realistic. So so we just recorded our Last of Us experience point for the original game, so if you haven't checked that out, make sure you do. An addendum to that too, Taylor, oh my god. There is a official Last of Us podcast.
Yeah.
Have you listened to it?
No, but as I was kind of looking through and seeing our podcast being put up, I discovered it was actually there. So that's super cool.
It is incredible. I listened to the first episode today when I was going for a little walk, and I was like, this is like the best behind, there was, I don't know if you've ever seen that documentary that Sony did on YouTube called Grounded. It was like the making of The Last of Us. That was really cool. Like it's on that level. It's like really well produced, and this guy is just interviewing actors, Neil Druckmann and the actors and some of the the combat designer, and it is really, really, really well done. And
that's awesome.
You and the listeners, everyone, start checking this out, because it was so cool to hear Neil talk about how he decided to make these decisions and who these characters are to him and how he came up with them. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So
he's a really interesting guy.
He is. He's got a really interesting backstory too. I don't know how much I think you probably know quite a bit. He's from Israel.
Yeah.
And he's definitely been through some stuff in his life. So a very interesting perspective for sure.
Certainly.
So I guess we'll just go ahead and jump in, right? I mean, there's not too much to do.
Yeah, let's get started. It's going to be a long one, so we got to jump right in.
We got to settle in and prepare ourselves, because there is a lot coming. This is a big game. We spent between an hour and a half and an hour and 45 minutes on the first one, and that first game is only 12 hours long.
Yeah, exactly.
This game is 25 hours long. How long did it take you? Do you know?
So I think I clocked in somewhere around 24 hours, and I was playing on normal difficulty.
Yeah, same. Yep. That's interesting how it really lines up like that.
Yeah.
It definitely seems to be a consistent finish time, run time, if you will.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, let's just do it. I was trying to think of okay, is there any kind of introductory things to say or do before we do this? But I don't believe there is. I mean, is there anything that you want to kind of address before we start, as far as your expectations for this game beforehand, or just any kind of setup, or do you want to just dive right in?
Yeah, no, I think it's worthy bringing up too. I mean, we touched on it a little bit in our spoiler cast kind of going over The Last of Us 2, but I thought it was a really cool experience and worth bringing up that both you and I played The Last of Us 1 basically right before the second one came out.
Yeah.
And so I think I literally finished it the day before it came out.
Same,
so everything
same here.
was, yeah, so it was literally perfect timing. And I thought it was really cool because every time something crazy would happen, we would kind of text each other back and forth. It was an interesting experience. So, but yeah, no, I'm excited to break into it. I think we should just go ahead and jump right in.
Okay, cool. Very cool. So I suppose the place to start is really just where the game starts. So we talked a lot before we started this about how we wanted to do this spoiler cast. Sometimes we can get a little too in the weeds and we're like, after this moment, then this moment, then this moment. So we're going to take a similar approach we took to the first one. We kind of picked what we feel like is like the most important plot points, and we're going to go to those one by one and just kind of combine both our thoughts on the storyline and the decisions and the characters and our analysis of the story and the gameplay and how the gameplay changes and what we feel. We're going to do our best to combine them and try not to get too granular if we can. So bear with us as we it's difficult because I want to talk about every last little piece of this game.
Yeah.
But we start with a recap, honestly. It's a nice way to bring people in who maybe didn't play it the day before.
Yeah.
But starts with Joel telling Tommy what happened in Salt Lake.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's really crazy about it too, and I don't know if you kind of noticed this, right? It was literally, I think, the first thing I noticed right as we get into the story, because we see the flashback, right, of Joel at the hospital, and he kills the doctor. He picks up Ellie, takes her out, and then it kind of brings us into kind of the current day with Joel and Tommy kind of on their trek through the woods back to Jackson. And I don't know about you, but the immediate thing I noticed was like when it went from cutscene into gameplay, it was almost like a seamless transition. And I think that was an amazing way to kind of start things off and be like, wow, look how far the technology has come since, PS3 coming into just about the end of PS4 to PS5. I mean, even if this game is a PS4 game, it's already next gen. I mean, it looks beautiful.
It's kind of mirrored what Last of Us was for that generation.
Yeah.
It came out the same year the PS4 came out on PS3. But that's also been kind of their style. Like even in the first Last of Us, when they get in the car accident and then you bust out of there and you crawl out, it's like that kind of the transitional style where they don't ever explicitly tell you that what you're watching has ended and you're now playing, but somehow we just kind of pick it up and we just know to start moving. But yeah, I really enjoyed that too. And I kind of liked the fact that when he's telling Tommy and it's showing you the flashback of the end of the game where he kills the surgeon and picks up Ellie and all that, the lighting is different. It's a little more almost dramatic looking, like it's like darker with these really bright lights. That's not the way the room looked, right? And I felt like that was on purpose. Like that's his memory of it. The colors change and the way things look in his memory are different than the way we saw it as our omniscient gamers watching what was happening. And I don't know how on purpose that was, but it felt like a purposeful choice to me.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think especially when it comes to recounting those events, it sounds like, seeing it from his perspective, I definitely think you're right on that. And
to kind of stay on this just for one more second, I think it's important to note Tommy's reaction in the sense that he's like totally okay with it.
Yeah. He's like, hey, I would have done the exact same thing. Or at least, I think he says, I don't know if I would have done anything different in your shoes, basically.
And he just can't believe it. And then he agrees with him. And I liked that because all we've done for the last 7 years is talk about what we feel about Joel's decision.
Yeah.
And we immediately address it. The game doesn't even wait. It just kicks the door down and, hey, we're going to talk about this right now. And I like that. I like that we didn't have to wait to get into the whole world is built on that decision that he makes in Salt Lake.
Yeah.
Going forward and before that. So, so I just appreciated how Tommy was just like right there for him, agreed with him, understood. He just Tommy, man, what a great guy.
Right.
What a great brother. Even if you disagree with him, it's like he's there for Joel and he's there for Ellie, and I don't think there's ever any doubting that, especially after that moment.
Exactly.
So we start with that, and then we get our nice the overlook as we ride our horses into the plane, and we see Jackson for the first time. And let's just kind of roll all this up into one. This whole kind of opening sequence where we get to see Ellie's room, and we get to see her and Joel interact a couple of different times before they, her and Dina. We get to meet so we're kind of introduced to characters. We're introduced to the way Ellie and Joel are now, and I don't know. What do you think about Jackson? Like, how do you, just knowing everything we have as a player from the last game, carrying everything in, like, I just felt like it was a really important place to start.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really interesting because it's one of the first times in this series where we kind of see a society that's really functioning and full of people that are trustworthy and working together. They've got different stores that people are working at. They have livestock and they have different events. Like at one point in the game, we see they have like kind of like a town festival and stuff like that. So it's interesting because you don't know in the first game like how much of that is there when you get to Jackson in the first game. And then once we actually are like getting into it, we can see people kind of living their lives. There's like a really cool scene where Ellie's like walking down the street with Jesse, and you're kind of getting a first-hand look at like what everybody's doing. What are all the jobs everybody has? It seems like people are on really tight schedules, especially when it comes to like going on patrols and things of that nature. So it seems like they've built a pretty organized city and have a lot of different systems going at once, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, and it was just nice. I like that this game starts out pretty easy and feeling like, okay, they do have a life here. Everything we went through in the first game, though Ellie might argue differently, wasn't for nothing, right? I mean, they built this great settlement, and people are happy as they can be given its relative circumstances. They're safe, they're safe here, and that's so different from the start of the first game, which is like a massive gut punch, and it's like, so we already know how bad the world is. Well, okay, here's how good it can be. Like, this is kind of this is the goal. This is what Joel wanted for Ellie. This is, I don't know, we're going to get into what Ellie wants as time goes on. But I think that was just an important juxtaposition because the way the rest of this game is, if they had tried to start up with another like, oh man, this is so, the gut punch in this game, even though it is in the beginning, it's further along. We get enough time. I think we get a good decent amount of time to really feel what their routines are like and the fact that they did achieve something good. And I think that's really important because then you know what they have to lose later.
Exactly.
So from there, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that we get to meet a new character. If I'm not mistaken, because it's kind of weird how we get, we go with Dina on the patrols, right? All through the woods and through the snow. I love snow in games.
Yeah,
I don't know what
it
it
looks
is.
gorgeous in the setting
so
too.
So good. Everything looks so fantastic. And I think this was a good introduction where my favorite parts of these games, honestly, are the slower moments where you're just kind of walking through and the characters are having dialogue and you're exploring and you're picking things up and I like how slow this game starts. It really takes a long time to get things going. Did you feel the same way, or did you think that maybe there needed to be things that picked up quicker, or how did you feel about the pacing for the first?
Yeah, I think in the beginning it's paced pretty well, especially since, we're getting introduced to new characters like Dina, and I mean, I talked about it in the first podcast or the first spoiler cast, but it's kind of doing that thing that I really like that The Last of Us does, where you have two characters interacting kind of while you're doing things. It's not like a dedicated cutscene. It's not like you don't have your controller in your hand while it's happening.
Yeah.
So it's really cool to, like, you know, you're going through these different areas. You're seeing more of the lived in universe of The Last of Us. You're going to these outposts and, right, you check the little notebook that has the different people that are checking in, and, you know, they'll write their name, who they're on patrol with, and then explain what the patrol was like. Like, went to outpost number 2, saw 3 infected, took care of them. Or then there's another entry where it's like, happened upon a group of travelers, they needed water, took them back to Jackson, so on and so forth. So again, it's kind of another window into the life of these characters and kind of the systems that they have set up that's super interesting.
Yeah, I really liked that as well. And the fact that this is routine for people, even in this sort of positive version of this world that we're getting, we're still having to kill clickers and kill runners and report hordes. And it's like, they're still living in a very oppressive environment. But they've managed to disband together, and I really appreciate that the level of detail throughout the game, along with the notes and how quality the writing is for all those notes. But even just, there are little things that you'll find in every room of this game, rooms that if you're not trying to look for them, 90% of players won't see some of these rooms that or these houses or whatever, and they're just filled with all kinds of, I mean, people went through so much of this game, and just notes, or even rooms that don't have like any interactable stuff in it. Yeah. There's still the way the bed is looking, and like the posters and all of the different, just wherever you are, there's just
there's a lot of
constant layers.
There's a lot of environmental storytelling too, where like there's not anything explicitly stated, but like there'll be like a boarded up room that you can't get to, that you have to access from like a ceiling and drop in, and you know, you find a dead body in the corner who like obviously like barricaded himself in there before he was basically killed or like succumbed to the elements. So that was another thing that I thought was really cool too.
Yeah.
The environments and all that.
Exactly. I sometimes I would find something and I go, I don't know. Almost no one else was going to find this, and someone went in here and took all the time to put all this stuff in here. So anyway, I just really appreciated that. So that's kind of the intro to the game, and then of course the other part of this introductory chapter is we get a brand new character. We get Abby. Mm-hmm. What was your reaction? And I'm going to tell you mine after you tell me yours, because I'm curious. Like, what was your reaction? What were your first thoughts when you wake up and it's Abby? Did you know who that was? Were you asking questions? Like, what was your take on that?
No clue, honestly. And I think the nice part about going into this game is that you and I were pretty much completely unspoiled from anything that was going to happen prior.
We managed to avoid the spoilers. Yeah.
Yeah, which was a Herculean effort. Like, I had to go through Twitter and like block any sort of word that had to do with The Last of Us. It ended up working, but yeah, the thing that was crazy, you know, you wake up as Abby, and you're playing as a new character. One of the things that I like immediately thought of is I was like, wow, this is very like Metal Gear Solid 2, where like you're picking up as a different character and you're having to play in that character's shoes. It was kind of a surreal feeling, but one of the immediate things I noticed about her, because there's a section where you're kind of going through like a pseudo tutorial where she's beating up infected people, and you notice like the power like behind her swings.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like she's beating infected with like her bare hands, right? And you're just like, wow, you feel like such a badass. But you're going through and just annihilating these infected, and it immediately shows like a difference in gameplay between her and Ellie, which I think is basically apparent right from the start of the game, which is cool.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And they also introduced this is a small thing, but I think it's actually pretty substantial, the dodge.
Oh yeah,
L1
absolutely.
to dodge. Now, I could be wrong. Someone might be like, wait, hold on. That happens. You're with Ellie when you learn that. But I remember playing as Abby in the snow and it telling me to hit L1 to dodge. I was like, what? And you can do this little dodge. It's such a small thing, but it adds a little bit of... You couldn't do that in the first one, right?
No, you couldn't.
Okay, I didn't think so. It just added something to melee combat. It was like another thing to think about and another strategy.
Yeah.
When you're in it, it's like, I can dodge these guys and counter them. And it just makes it almost, you almost have these combos going from like a fighting game. And you're like, dodge, hit, dodge, hit, dodge, hit. And it's like,
oh yeah.
And it changes the way the outcome of the fight, because you're moving around the space, so that will change the way that you kill an enemy, whether you're hitting them against something in the environment or if you're just going to like end up tripping them and smashing their face with her boot.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways that it ends up. So it always felt very fluid and real, and I really liked that small addition to the combat.
Yeah, you're saving ammo too, right? Like if you can time the dodges perfectly, you're not spending as much time actually shooting your guns. And they are not very generous with the ammunition in this game either. So
not at all.
Learning how to use that dodge and use it to your advantage is super, important, especially in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. I was so confused when I couldn't tell who. I was wondering, like, when she woke up, and I was like, who the fuck is that? And I just kept thinking, like, am I supposed to know this? Did I miss something? Is there something that I was so confused for a while, until eventually it just clicked for me. I'm like, okay, these are just new characters. And then you realize, okay, it's snowy, and then they look down over the pass, and they see Jackson at nighttime, and it's lit up, and they're blown away by this huge settlement. Her and Owen, Abby and Owen. And at this point, we don't know anything about these characters, but that's when they first reference. How are we ever going to find him?
Yeah.
And this is kind of when what we were talking about in our EXP episode for The Last of Us, this is like back to that writing style of Neil Druckmann. That's like, I'm going to tell you a lot of information with like 6 words.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to, I'm as in from the perspective of Neil, like, I'm not going to underestimate your intelligence as an audience.
Mm-hmm.
When they said that, did you immediately like, oh, it's got to be Joel?
Yeah. I mean, that's
right.
That's what your mind immediately jumps to, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that you immediately thought of Joel, and I think that's kind of where the seed starts getting planted too, where you're thinking like, are these people fireflies possibly?
That's
maybe
exactly
perhaps?
what I thought. I was like, oh my God, this is a group of what's left of the fireflies, and they're out for blood for Joel.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking the whole time. And then it's like, wow, like, this is weird that I'm playing as these people, and I just didn't. It was just a cool way to add all of this uncertainty and doubt into everything. Now, at that point, every step I took with Abby, I was like, I don't know that I really want to be here.
Right.
It's sort of like a parallel to when Joel is going through that hospital. The first time you're just like, is this? Can I like turn around?
Right.
Can we not do?
Get back in the car.
Yeah, get back in the car. Let's just rewind here a little bit. But ultimately, this horde. This is the first time we really see a horde, I feel like.
Yeah.
From either game. And it's pretty frightening.
Definitely.
The sound design. This is one of the moments where sound design really comes through. I don't know if you remember this part, but when you're playing as Abby and you're running away from all of these fucking infected that are after you, and you can hear like dozens of them screaming
right
behind you. Oh my God. And it's just like, it's like turning on my fight or flight buttons in my brain, I was like, oh, I'm like, the hair is standing up on the back of my neck. The sound design is so good. And I was also playing with headphones. I have a decent pair of headphones. So I was just like, it was working. It was super effective. And you're just running away. And I just love having to kind of be on your feet and like jump over stuff. And the design of this world that looks completely open as you're running, and you just kind of know where to run. as you're being chased,
Yeah.
and that happens multiple times through the game. I love
Where they
feeling
kind of
that
filter
way.
you through sections, and
But it
you
feels,
kind of immediately know where to go.
yeah, but it still feels like you're making the decision. Like it doesn't. It's not like I'm just running down a hallway and then the hallway turns 90 degrees to the left, and therefore I do.
Yeah.
I feel as if I'm watching this person and I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna go this way. I was like, well, that wasn't my idea. That's just
Yeah, it feels
incredible game design.
instinctual.
Yeah. So that's a fun trick to pull off, and I'm sure it's not easy to build stuff like that. But that's that's the level of development that we're at. Naughty Dog is ridiculous with stuff like this. So yeah, it's a weird kind of a juxtaposition, this whole part, because right before this we're with Dina and Ellie, and they discover like the one of their former I don't know what you want to call him, the guy that they used to run with them, and Tommy, I guess.
Yeah, he was like big on the patrols.
Yeah, and they liked him a lot, and he's dead now. And they discover that he had like a basement where he was growing weed, and I don't know. They have this great moment. I think the writing is fucking astounding, and I love the beginning of their relationship.
Yeah, exactly. And this is kind of where we first get that character building moment between them, where they're lighting up the joint and hanging out, in the basement and everything. Worthy to also bring up too that if you look in that compound long enough, you actually find a note that says that former guy who used to live there basically was an ex-Firefly at one point in time as well.
Yeah, you find his little pendant.
Yeah.
That has his name on it. His little Firefly dog tag thing that they have.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting discovery, and they're talking about they're flirting down there, and I don't know. They're just, again, it's just incredible writing. I wish I could write script that well. I can't.
Right.
At least not yet. And so we kind of go back and forth between these two characters, and I don't remember exactly how it all goes, but eventually it's Jesse. We kind of have this like love triangle. This is something I remember thinking about multiple times in this game, is that like, when people, like some guys will be like, oh, it's like a chick flick. And like the way you'll identify a chick flick is because it's like Grey's Anatomy, right? These shows like this are where people, this is what a lot of people would say. It's like, oh, it's overly dramatic, or love triangles, and like
overly focused on the romance.
Everyone's falling in love and whatever. And for what I've always felt like, it's like, I think anything can be good, anything can be interesting. I'm not much of a genre guy. I mean, there's certain things, sci-fi or history or whatever, that I'll be like, oh, I'm interested in that just because of the concept. Right. But I really think that if it's well made enough, if you write it well and the characters are real and it doesn't feel forced. I mean, we have a love triangle in this game, right? It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels like, man, this is, we all kind of have real life experiences. We know people, and it's like all this drama between these three people, and this, they dated her and all that. But I think it lends to the dimensions of these characters, is, and the fact that, obviously this is a horrible world and everyone's dying, but you're still going to run into this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And, kudos to the voice acting cast too. I think that the script writing, but also the voice acting comes out really well in this scene too, because Jesse discovers both Ellie and Dina are kind of getting intimate, and it actually feels like a really awkward scene, right, where he kind of like walks in on them.
Yeah, and they're getting dressed.
And that scene wouldn't have been sold as well had either of those two things not worked out well. So
yeah, absolutely, that's a great point. Yeah, all the vocal performances in this game are absolutely top notch. I mean, if the Oscars could start electing people from games, I think they would do it for just about everyone in this. And there's a little moment there where Ellie tells Dina that she's immune and she got bit, and that's what the tattoo is for. Yeah, and Dina's just like laughs at her.
Yeah, it takes it as a joke, basically.
It's like, stop teasing me, So I thought that was crazy. She totally came clean, and it didn't work at all.
Yeah,
so that was
It was such an unbelievable fact that like it comes off as a joke, which is crazy to think about.
Well, and Ellie, you can pick up from her personality at this point that she's like kind of a dour person, and so even when she's joking, she's kind of like sarcastic. So it's always hard to tell if she's kidding or she's being serious. You know what I mean? So in Dina's defense, he's like, I don't know. I never know what you're telling me is if you're just giving me shit or not. You know?
Right.
So I thought that was an important moment. All those kind of levity things, and we're getting introduced to the characters and the drama, and the three of them, and the little love triangle that does play a part later. And then we get to the point where Jesse's there to tell them that Joel and Tommy aren't back yet, and that's when we cut to the fact that as they're running away from the horde, Abby and Owen run into Tommy and Joel.
Yeah.
Give me your A to B to C experience, your thought process, and everything that's happening when they run into each other. And they save Abby.
Yeah. So, yeah, because when we last left off, right, they were kind of running from the horde and going through these different buildings and stuff like that to get away. So, like, that entire time that interaction is happening, like, you're getting this, like, knot in your stomach where you're like, oh, this does not feel good. Like, this was supposed to be a normal day, and now it's just gone totally to hell.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you get to the point where those two parties meet up, and you remember the dialogue from the beginning, and you're like, this can't be going anywhere really good. And ultimately, it ends up becoming, one of the biggest events in the game.
Yeah, if not the.
Yeah.
It's really the crux of the entire plot.
The catalyst.
Yeah, exactly. So they save Abby, and they introduce themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Tommy does. Tommy tells her their names.
Right.
And that's kind of what leads them. They're being chased by the horde, and Abby's like, "Hey, we're holed up in a cabin. Come with us." And one thing leads to another, and that's that we get to the point where we realize, like, so leading up to that moment, everyone who's listening to this part of this Spoilercast, we know what happens. We know what's going to happen. Just how did you feel like Joel was somehow going to get out of it? Did you think that, like, there was so many thoughts racing through my head at this moment. Abby seemed really cool. He clearly kind of trusted her. I think it's important that her and Ellie are almost the same age, or if not exact the same age. And I also think it's important to note that, years later, they've been living in this settlement where they've run into a lot of strangers. They talk about it multiple times. Strangers come through and trade, and I feel like Joel is a different person, utterly.
Yeah. It's been enough years living in somewhat relevant comfort where I don't feel like them introducing themselves to people that they saved is it's not like out of character, I feel like.
And especially since it's Tommy too.
Right, naturally. And so I don't know, I definitely felt like it wasn't completely out of nowhere, but you get to the part where they get to the house that they're holed up in, and they introduce each other, and then there's kind of that pause, right? And then it's like Joel says, you almost sound like you've heard of us before.
Yeah, well,
and that's because we have.
Yeah.
Right? And so then one of the guys shotgun blasts him in the leg,
Abby
and like
does.
Abby does, and that's just when everything basically hits the fan at that point in time.
Like, if you can remember, I don't know if you documented this in your brain pan. Did you have any kind of reaction at all? Like obviously you had a reaction. That's a stupid ass question.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, did you see it coming to the point where you were just like, oh well, could have told you that, or what? Did it impact you? Like, just go. This is like the most. This is of all the games, like of all the moments in both games, like this is it, right? Like this is everything coalesced. So I
won't say
lighten it too much,
No, I would say it didn't completely take me by surprise. I think once I had known that they were going to make a second game, I kind of had figured that Joel might not make it out of that particular game. I won't say it was like completely telegraphed, but it also wasn't like like, I wasn't completely oblivious to it, right?
Sure.
But I think the thing that really shocked me was how soon it happens. Because Joel dying in the beginning is, you're only like, what, maybe 3 hours into the game?
If that.
Yeah. And so it was kind of one of those things where I expected, right, maybe something to happen where he dies at the end of the game rather than the beginning. But just the brutal way it happens, you know, I still had a reaction. I was like, okay, wow, I didn't expect this to happen so early in the game. And that was kind of my first reaction. And it almost happened so quickly that it's hard to process, right? Like, it's such a quick moment and a quick, resolution that it's hard to like have like a really long, drawn out reaction to it. It's not a scene that's made to really like ruminate on for too long. So that was kind of my first, like, I was obviously holy shit, but it was kind of a, very quick reaction.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't give you that much time, like you said, to really ruminate on it, I suppose. I think for me, I don't know if you remember this, but back when Last Jedi came out, all the critics who were praising it were like, "Oh, it's so subversive."
Yeah.
And I don't think they were using that right? Like, I think if you look at it and you go, "Hey, I'm just going to make a huge joke out of this really serious thing because that's subversive." That's not subversive. That's just like fucking with your audience. Right? It's like
right.
fourth wall breaking, like, you dumb nerds, like, get over this.
Or if it is being subversive, it's not doing it well enough to the point where enough of the audience is buying it.
Right. And I think the fact that clearly Neil and the writers, Hallie Gross is another writer on this game. She was like the narrative lead. I think that it's not like they didn't know that everyone expected Joel to die in this game at some point. But I think what most of us were expecting was a Iron Man death.
Yeah.
Right? He's gonna,
like, a heroic sacrifice or some
test.
Kind of.
He's gonna sacrifice himself to save Ellie. He's gonna sacrifice himself to save whomever. And he doesn't get that, right? And that's subversion. That, to me, that is subversion. To know, okay, look, people already have an inkling because they know that Last of Us is a serious world and that, they're probably going to kill off Joel.
Right.
It's like, well, yeah, you're right. But it's not going to go the way you think it will.
You expect it. Yeah, at all.
And so you managed to get me, the royal me, as in the player, still shocked, going into it expecting his death. And if that's not a great example of a subversive writing, I don't know what is. Because I was, through the whole thing, of course, then you take back over as Ellie and you find the cabin and you go your way through and you hear them just beating on him. And that whole process, and when she gets in there and they subdue her because there's like 9 of them or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was disturbed. Maybe I remember I had my hand over my mouth like the whole time at that whole sequence when you have Ellie down and they're just that he's just been beaten to an absolute like pulp. And I don't even mean the word, like the phrase absolute pulp, like literally he is like this flayed, and they show him to us. No punches pulled. It's really hard.
It's totally brutal. It's easily the entire game is a pretty brutal game, but obviously to see kind of Joel in this state is pretty emotional. It gets to be pretty brutal, and again, one of the things that I can't stress enough is how good the voice cast is, because Ellie's voice lines in this moment where she's saying, Joel, get up, you better fucking get up, it's just like you really feel the emotion and the punch behind those words. And just that scene It's so well crafted. It's brutal, it's tragic, and there's so many emotions rolled up into it. But I think that for as brutal as it is and as emotional as it is, it strikes all of the right chords that I think it was supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. You can hear it's like I feel like Ashley Johnson wasn't even acting. She was just it's like she'd been through it before, and it was just
Yeah.
it was almost like there wasn't, and I guess that's what great acting is. I mean, I don't know, I'm not an actor, but I've never. That made it even worse is the fact that it's Ellie who's in so much pain. It was almost like doubling down. I'm already upset that Joel is clearly going to die, but it's almost worse, at least for me, to see Ellie going through what she's going through, her struggle against this reality that she can't handle. My dogs are barking.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's just a traumatic event, and to basically watch it happen right in front of her is, I mean, you can tell that's not an event that's going to be forgotten anytime soon, right?
No, not at all. Well, and we'll touch on it later. It's also people weren't happy about it, so
Yeah.
we'll get into that. But oh my God, these dogs are losing their mind back here. I don't know if my mic is picking it up, but apologies if it is. Really professional podcasting here.
Right.
Yeah, so Abby kills Joel, man, with the final swing of that golf club. Just, you assume blows his head up. I mean, she hits him hard enough. You hear it, right? And that's that. And they spare Tommy and Ellie, which I remember at the moment going,
Why?
oh, wow, they let them go.
Yeah.
I was really surprised. I was thinking, how are we going to, I remember before that, I was like, how are we going to get out of this? Because obviously Ellie gets her chance to get revenge. How are we escaping this? You don't escape it. They spare your lives.
Right.
And they discuss it amongst themselves. They're like, we got to kill him. And Abby's the one who says, no, I'm not going to do that. We're not going to kill them.
Yeah, they made it a concerted effort that they were obviously targeting Joel, and that anybody else they weren't the priority target, right? So
Right. Oh, okay. Any last words for Joel?
No. Rest in peace to an amazing character. I thought his death was done very well, and like I mentioned, it hit all the emotional peaks that I thought it should.
Yeah.
So
not everyone is a martyr. People die in ways that are not dignified all the time.
No.
You know what I mean?
Especially not in this universe.
Especially not in this universe, absolutely not. But in any universe, it's like, and I think that's what's so important about what makes this game and other shows and things like that treat death the way death really is, which is it's not really judgmental, and it kills whoever it wants, whenever it wants, and however it wants, and not everything has to
situational.
line up the way that we want it to, the way that we would hope it would. And I think it was an incredibly brave decision by the creators, and I applaud them for taking that risk, knowing that they would have some outside consequences.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm sure that when Mr. Martin was writing The Red Wedding, he wasn't thinking, oh, my fans are just going to love this.
No.
He wasn't writing his book for the fans, though. That's why people like it, because it's true to him and his story, and that's the same thing here, I feel like.
Yeah, and it's actually worth bringing up as well, and I'm super glad that you brought up The Red Wedding, because I feel like it conjures the same sort of feelings that this does.
It's the last time I had that kind of pit in my stomach from anything.
Yeah.
Was The Red Wedding, and then it was the same feeling, that shocked utter silence. It's the first time I've had that since Red Wedding, so I felt like
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I think also most importantly, it also shows us too that in this game, in this story, nobody's really safe, right? Like, nobody has plot armor.
Right.
Nobody's immune to dying and dying in a brutal way. So it also kind of sets the tone for the rest of the game, right? Because you're like, if they can kill Joel in that fashion with that much brutality, you know, it makes you fear for everybody else.
Yeah,
it makes you fear for Ellie and Dina and whoever else.
I was constantly worried everyone was going to die every minute. You know, like...
Yeah, and that was intentional,
Who knows what they're going to do with all of our beloved characters.
Right.
All right. So we'll wrap up. That was going to be a big part of it. And on to Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, you know, there's a lot that goes on. Is there any part in between you want to quickly break down before we move on to kind of really where the game starts, I feel like, in earnest?
Yeah. It definitely picks up. There's one scene in particular I think is worth bringing up, and I won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but it was definitely a part that really stood out to me was the aftermath of Joel's death. There's a scene where you go from the graveyard that they've kind of fashioned for some of the citizens in Jackson, and you walk from the graveyard to Joel's house, and I remember just going through his house and that being easily one of the most emotional scenes in the entire game. And this was actually the first scene in the game where I really got misty-eyed, right? Because you're going through the house and you're seeing all of these different pictures. There's the picture of Joel with his original daughter Sarah from the first game that's, you know, framed up, and there's a bunch of different memories associated with that house and things of that nature. You know, you pick up a coffee cup and look at it that Joel drinks out of, and Ellie kind of comments on it. But there's one really heartbreaking scene where she goes into Joel's closet in his room upstairs and finds his jacket, which I think he wore in the first game. I could be mistaken, but she basically takes that jacket and kind of smells it. And it's such a like heartbreaking scene, right? Because it's like, you know, scent is one of the things that conjures up the most memory.
Absolutely.
And man, that was a gut punch. I just remembered getting super emotional at that scene. I think that was the time where then you could really ruminate on Joel's death a lot, in that scene in particular.
Yeah, they let us have that moment.
Yeah, it really got to me, for sure.
Yeah, you know, and that's when we also come into like the facial animation, because, you know, when she does that and she smells the jacket, you know, like her bottom lip is quivering, and like you can see her like trying to take in deep breath and stuff, and just like her eyes, the way her eyes are moving, just the most subtle, tiniest little details of being captured. You forget that it's a, you know, a game, that it's graphics at all. It's like,
yeah.
And
it's 100% cinematic. I mean, it's incredible.
It's technologically part of it. You know, I don't think you could have done this game too much earlier than right now.
Yeah.
You know, so
anyway, I thought that was a really emotional scene and worth bringing up. He has
woodworking, and like he had grown so much as a human being over the last 5 years or whatever it was.
Yeah.
You know, he has hobbies that are enjoyable.
Yeah.
Right? Like you said,
things that humans have when they're comfortable.
Yeah. He framed the picture of Sarah, which he was constantly trying to get rid of that picture the whole first game.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's framed. You know, it's out there. It's open. He looks at it every day. One part of that got me. She finds the watch. Did you find that?
Yeah, the broken watch. Yeah, I think it's on his bed,
which is like 9 layers of depression, right? It's like, it's the gift that Sarah gave him. It's the fact that, you know, Ellie comments that his watch is broken in the first game, and how much that means when she says that, and she doesn't even know what she's talking about. And
right.
And now she knows what the watch means. So it's like these like triple layer thing, all visualized just by looking at a watch, right? And it's like all of it hits you at the same time. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's a really important scene for Ellie and for the player, I think, to both kind of say goodbye.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the reason that they know they need to go to Seattle is it's WLF, right? They saw like the patches on those guys that said Washington Liberation Front, and they just kind of assumed Seattle, which I guess is a safe assumption.
Yeah, right.
Did you expect that the game was going to be about the trip to Seattle, or were you surprised when it just went boom and it just like boom, they're in Seattle now from Wyoming?
Yeah, no, I think there was kind of a part of me that thought maybe there might be a little bit more of a journey, only because in the first game, the journey to get from Boston to Salt Lake was kind of a journey,
Yeah.
right? Where you're going through different states and different seasons and things of that nature. So I thought that might play a part a little bit, but ultimately I thought it was a good decision to get us just straight there because there's so much content once you get to Seattle that it takes up pretty much an entire game. Obviously, it takes up an entire game's worth of time on its own. So yeah, definitely was interesting, in the context of going from the first game to this one.
And I talked to Arthur about this, our former co-host. I spoke to him about this, and at first he had said that he didn't really like that the whole game took place in one spot at first. Because he really enjoyed the journey and the sense of time in the first game. But I was responding that to me, I felt like if they just did another road trip, it just wouldn't have, I don't know. I feel like it would have been too similar to the first game.
Yeah,
it's like,
I agree.
So we're going to do like another seasonal road trip. Like this is what Last of Us is. It's just road trips,
Yeah, exactly.
Also, absolutely biased. Seattle is an extension of my home. I live in Washington. I've been going to Seattle my whole life. I love that city. I'm pretty familiar with that city. And this was like the first time that I ever got to kind of do, there's other shows and games, people who play Fallout and live in the DC area or live in Boston or, other people have gotten to experience this. I was pretty excited, and I did not know because zero spoilers. I had managed to avoid the spoilers. So when that black screen pops up and it says Seattle, I was like, what?
Whoa!
I was so excited. I was like, this is so cool. And then when this first part, you kind of get this like semi-open world on the horse. You and Dina are on this horse, and you're coming in. You come in from the woods, and you enter I-5. It was just so weird to me to see this and to see this form of this place that I know so well in this way. So that added a whole layer of enjoyment for me. And it was pretty accurate. The little like slice that we got that we're going to talk about here for a little bit. All the streets, and like I was like, okay, so I know these streets. I know Marion, and I know all these different. It's like, oh, here's Spring Ave. Okay, like it was just so weird. To experience.
That was one of the things that I was actually going to ask you about was like how accurate was everything. Obviously like there's so much overgrowth in Seattle now at this point in time. Like, obviously we're years removed from Outbreak Day, but you really felt that it was super accurate to kind of where everything was located?
Yeah. There was one kind of what I would call an inaccuracy throughout the game that I'll talk about in a second, but yeah, like even that portion was correct. It's a small little square area that you're in. They had a few of the landmarks, like the sanctuary, which is in this game it's the synagogue. It's never been a synagogue, so I was kind of like, what? It's like a place where they have like little concerts, and it used to be like a Methodist church back in the day. That domed building it was never been a synagogue, but whatever.
Interesting.
It doesn't matter. I think that was more for the story, and who's to say it wasn't? I don't know. I wasn't affected by that. I just thought it was interesting. But yeah, it's very true. I was sending you pictures too. We'll get to this later, but later they find what is called in the game the Pinnacle Theater, which is the Paramount Theater in reality. And I was like, dude, this is the Paramount. I was sending you pictures of the actual Paramount. It's like the exact same thing. It was really cool.
That is awesome.
So they did that a lot. I would say the only inaccuracy is that Seattle downtown is where you spend 99% of your time in Seattle in this game. You're in downtown Seattle. Seattle is terraced. It is cut into a really pretty steep ridge, and everything is downhill, right? Like all the streets that go west are at a very sharp angle downtown, down toward the sound, and you can see the water from almost everywhere in Seattle. And in this game, it's like flat. Like I was always like, where the fuck is the sound? Why can't I don't? It's like I don't know if they couldn't do the height.
It's interesting.
They couldn't do the height map, or what, or because the streets had sunk. Most of the streets had sunken in, which makes sense, and that's why you see like the buildings, or some of the buildings are toppled over and all that, because Seattle's built on top of all this decrepit tunnels and stuff. So it makes sense that maybe it would flatten out a little bit, but I was constantly looking for the water. You don't get to see the water until like way later, but the aquarium looks exactly like that. You know, you have the wheel, the great wheel, the Seattle wheel, that's there. It was perfect. It was exactly the way. All that it was really strange. I've been on that Ferris wheel.
Yeah.
It was super weird. I've been inside that aquarium. Some of it's not accurate at all, and other parts of it are incredibly like down to the wire. I almost knew where I was at times. So anyway, we won't keep going on that. I did want to just talk about that for a second though, because that was an absolute blast for me to play this game.
Right.
For that.
Well, I think one of the really interesting parts of this beginning section too, this little opening, open world kind of section, is you kind of you start getting used to the gameplay elements that were introduced, from the first one, right? The gameplay elements that you get introduced to are kind of moving the ladders and doing a lot of the water puzzles with Ellie. So now we get kind of introduced to these new like rope physics puzzles, which like are really cool. I didn't know. I thought it was really cool, even though it was a really small detail, how like whenever Ellie picks up like a piece of rope, she like kind of wraps it around her arm as you get closer to the source of the rope, and just the way that she's able to like throw it over things looks really cool. Yes. So that was a cool little like animation detail that I was like, this is super interesting. I don't know why. This is the nerdiest thing ever, but the fact that I can like pick up this rope and it looks really realistic is awesome.
Yeah.
And
that's a great point. And that kind of level of detail is extended through like every little thing in this whole game,
Yeah.
Even I enjoy just picking stuff up. Like just walking around. I mean, like looking for stuff, looking for supplies, and like they open every little container and they open every little drawer, and she reaches her hand in and she grabs the things. Right? You're not running over ammo and it's just like materializing in your inventory.
Right.
It's just these small little things. They don't mean anything on their own, but like as a whole, when they're just the way they hold the guns, they hold the rifle and they hold the pistol, and you can see every
helps you to immerse.
Yeah, every little piece of the gun. You can see it working individually, the action and just all the little. It's just so immersive and it feels so real. And the city feels that way, and I like this. I like this kind of open world thing. This was you have not played the Uncharted games yet. This is sort of a new thing from Uncharted 4, where they give you these little open worlds, and you're in a Jeep in Uncharted 4, and you have like 4 things you have to do, and you just drive to these things, and there's some optional stuff in there, and the characters are talking the whole time. God of War kind of did that, where you're in the boat. You're in the rowboat and you're going to all the different little points, right? And they're all talking, and it's like character development. I like that in this. That was the same design where they're here and they're on the horse, and you're getting on and off the horse, and you're exploring this little part of Seattle and seeing all of these different stories. Was there any of them that you wanted to talk about before we move on to the next part, or?
No, I think you're exactly right. I think a lot of this beginning opening section is rife with a lot of exploration, and not only that, but also doing really good character building.
Yeah.
I was going to say in the section beforehand that the dialogue exchange between Ellie and Dina when you're actually in the synagogue is really cool.
Yeah.
Because it goes into Dina's backstory about how, her family is Jewish, and so like you get kind of this context for like some of the stuff they believe in, and they're kind of going through it. So it's really cool. I like that they did that. I think it just helped to build the characters up in the beginning.
And I thought it was great to kind of know that even through all of this, we're still teaching history in the whatever school programs they come up with in this world, right?
Right.
I mean, like they know about the Holocaust. They mention it when they're talking about it.
Yep.
And like I like that little level of detail where they just kind of mention it's like, oh, okay, so there's they have school, and we know that already from when Ellie was in Boston. She said she learned stuff, but I just think it's interesting to to know that there's enough people who are like still trying to teach the same history as if the world didn't basically restart.
Yeah, they're not just learning strictly like survival skills. Now we're comfortable enough in the society in Jackson where like actual like education beyond like just survival is being taught. That is interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good touch. So we go through the music store, the coffee shop, just all these little moments of dialogue, and of course the gameplay. I think the stealth gameplay is phenomenal. You run into a few different groups of people. You're looking for the WLF the whole time. We don't find them really. You just get some infected.
Yeah. It's also worth bringing up too that in this beginning section, we didn't exactly bring it up in the beginning, but we're also kind of looking for Tommy in this beginning section as well, because you find out that he has made his own journey to Seattle himself.
Yeah.
So I think he's like a day or two ahead of us.
Yeah,
and so as you're going through the city, you're kind of picking up the pieces of sort of where he left off, which is interesting.
And he did it for Ellie. He was, I think, ready to not go after them.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, stay here and I'll go do it. Which I thought was really interesting. So they make their way through, the hotel, the courthouse, all these little mini stories you're picking up along the way are really, really well done. I was engrossed the whole time, finding all these little things and collectibles. They go through a school, and eventually they realize that they need to go to the Channel 13 news headquarters. Because they find out that one of the people who was in the room where Joel was killed is there. One of the wolves is there.
Yeah.
And I feel like the way this game is paced is really interesting, right? You kind of have this slow start with the horrific end of the intro. And then again, you kind of slow down again and you have this exploratory thing. And then the Channel 13 segment is really when this game, I feel like, you could make an argument up until this point. Last of Us 2 feels very similar to Last of Us 1, both from gameplay and kind of just the way it's structured. Like, okay, we're traveling, a really bad thing happens. Like I'm kind of seeing, but I feel like tonally, Last of Us 2
it shifts,
really changes at the Channel 13 news station. It's like a left-hand turn, like a 90-degree shift, and the rest of the game is so different from the first one in a lot of ways. It's darker, and I think that really starts with Channel 13. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that this is the first section too where you start to see that, like you said, the tone also shifts, but it also like the horror element starts to get played up quite a bit in the game as well. Because easily we'll talk about some of the other scenes, I'm sure, that kind of put out this survival horror vibe, but the Channel 13 news station section is easily one of the creepiest parts of the game.
Oh, yeah.
Because especially when you get there, right, we get introduced to this new faction of, evil or bandit survivors rather than the Seraphites or the Scars, who end up like stringing up all of the people, these WLF members, from like the ceiling of like the news station.
Right.
And you walk into the main building and there's all these like hung bodies from the ceiling, and there's this really like intense music playing. And I want to find out what this track is called, because I remember the music in this section just being completely unnerving.
Totally unsettling. Yeah.
Yeah. And you get to the part where there's a lot of platforming in this section too, where you're trying to get to the top of the TV station, and you hear the muffled radio from behind the door of one of the sections where this person that was with the WLF members was found. One of the guys that was with the group that was out in Jackson. Sorry, I don't know why that was taking me a second to think of that, but but easily one of the creepiest sections of the game, and I think it really starts to set the tone where you're like, okay, this isn't just your run-of-the-mill action survival game. There's also going to be some horror elements as well, and I'm super excited to break into that because it only becomes more apparent from this part of the game out. So.
Yeah, and everything just gets, I feel like, more violent, more brutal, scarier. Everything starts to unravel from here on. And I think one thing I want to touch on, which is something we talked about in our EXP episode for Last of Us, is what I've always appreciated about Last of Us as a franchise now that the second one's out, is they take these cliches of the genre, right? The zombie genre. We talked about the cordyceps and how you take the cliche of zombies and you make it something that feels new again and is probably the best adaptation of the thing so far, in our opinion.
Yeah.
And I feel like they did that at the end of Last of Us. Cannibals. I mean, again, kind of cliche, but in that game it didn't feel forced, right? It just felt like, oh my God, I was just concerned that she was going to be eaten, and David gives her that plate of food and she's and it's like, oh my God, are you eating a person? They managed to find these angles on well-worn cliches of the genre and breathe life into them.
Yeah.
And that happens
Agreed.
again here with the cult. Right? Oh, it's a cult. They believe in some crazy religion that's come up in the end of the world, and they write these. But when you get there, even though it's a cliche, I'm not. That's not what my brain is processing. I'm just afraid. I'm like, holy shit, these guys are gutted and they're hanging from the ceiling, and there's all these cryptic things written on the walls, and
there's pictures of like their leader who's like this messianic figure, like this woman.
Yeah.
That like you find several times throughout the game. She's like painted in these murals on the wall.
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, totally creepy.
And so it's just it's kind of another example. It's like they do it on purpose. I feel like Neil's like, all right, like what's a really overly done cliche of this genre? Let's see if we can make it new again. And they did it. I think the Seraphites, and obviously we don't even see any Seraphites in this scene. And I think that's a big part of it. It's like what made the original Alien scary, especially back in the 1979, is you don't even see the thing until kind of the end of the game. You get little parts of it, and it's like imagining what had happened in this building is worse than having to see it.
Yeah.
I think that's what makes it so creepy, is there's an air of mystery. We don't know everything about them. We don't know who they are. We don't know if they're still here and they're watching us. I felt like I was being watched the whole time I was in there.
Yeah.
And I just...
That's so true.
That's, it's just great environmental storytelling. And I think that as we went through this, obviously we get a lot more nuanced. We learn about this cult, and it changes the way you see them a little bit, which is another part that makes it even better, is that they aren't just evil dudes who like to gut people, right? we get a lot more from them later. So the evolution of all these different elements coming in, I think were just so expertly done. And to your point, this is where the survival horror starts, because a new group of WLF shows up because they've lost contact with one of their bases in this Channel 13 news station, and they're finding out the scars have attacked, and you and Ellie and Dina are there. And eventually that leads us down into the basement of the building, which then connects to like a train station. And that's when we really get like the first survival horror, and we get shamblers introduced, which are more sound design. So tell me a little bit about that move into this survival horror before we move on to kind of the next plot point.
Yeah. And I mean, they only outdo themselves from here on out, basically, right? Because you take the creepiness of the Channel 13 news station, and then you just crank it up to 11, right, with the tunnels.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you go in there, and everything is super dark. Like, this is, like, really the point in the game where, like, your flashlight is on, like, 24/7. And then, you're being hunted not only by the infected that are still in the tunnels, but you're also being followed by the WLF members. And this is the part of the game where, I remember there's one part specifically that I thought was so well done. It was like something out of Resident Evil, where you're in like a grate above this one section of the game where they introduce the Shambler. And there's just, WLF members fighting off these infected, and they're like, oh, we got to get out of here. And you're hearing gunshots and people getting dragged across the floor as you're just like sitting in this vent, and you're like, I don't know if I really want to go any further now. Maybe I'll just sit in this grate for a while.
And then you drop down even further. You just feel like you're just going down and down, and all the lighting changes. You have all this red lighting down there. It's just weird. I don't know what it was. it just has this effect on you.
Yeah, it's definitely creepy, right? Because it's like blood, like it's
like
blood
you're going
red
into hell.
lighting. Yeah,
You know, it's
basically
really what it was like. You're going into hell, and these creatures are. Did you fight the shamblers down there?
I did, yeah. Usually, what I tried to do, I tried to get through every part that was stealth, but for some reason, the stealth in this game is really difficult, even on the normal mode. Like, I felt like there were a lot of times where I would get through like half of a section without killing anybody, and then, you know, I would forget that somebody was behind me, and then, you know, inevitably just get jumped by everyone. But yeah, there's one section where they put you in a room with like 2 different shamblers, and they're at like these different choke points like in the room, and I think there's one section where like there's really no way to get past them.
Yeah,
because I don't think they really fall for your bottle.
they do a little bit
throwing trick.
They don't go sprinting over there, but it'll distract them for a second. Because I was curious about that, because sometimes when a game will introduce a new enemy type or whatever, it's like they want you to fight it so that you know what it can do, right? It's almost like a tutorial. But I was so fucking afraid of it. And there's runners down there. Because the runners are nothing. The reason runners are scary is because they alert everyone else to your spot, and then they bring the clickers and the shamblers and the bloaters to you, right?
And they can actually see you,
and
too. They have like visibility.
So I actually managed to kill the runners, and I used a bottle, and I got out of there, and I didn't have to fight the shamblers at all.
Oh, wow.
Which I just like that. I like that it was like, you're not being pushed into this tutorial. Here, fight this thing real quick so we can show. It was like, it just feels more realistic and more frightening. The fact that like, I went out of here. I managed to get out of there. I snuck out, and I didn't have to fight them at all. They're still down there in my version of the world. Those 2 shamblers are just walking around that basement to kill someone else, because I certainly did not kill them. I didn't want anything to do with them.
Well, it's also really cool too, because in the times where like I would have to like go loud, you could really do like a Resident Evil sort of thing where because they're kind of a slower enemy, obviously, so you can kind of run around the room corralling up these different people or the infected into like one spot, and then Molotov cocktail the other guys, and then have to deal with the shambler.
Yeah.
So I like that they kind of introduced this. There's like a puzzle element to the combat where you know exactly what your order of operations is, from going and killing just the regular infected to leaving the shambler for last. So that way you just solely have that guy to deal with. So
yeah, absolutely. That's a really smart. And they kind of did that with the human enemies too. They introduced like the big Seraphite guys with like the hammers and stuff. And so it's like, okay, how do I want to approach this, which is sort of like Doom almost, principally. Obviously Doom is fast-paced, not totally different, but that idea of introducing these layers of different kinds of enemies for you to sort of instinctively know, okay, this is the plan based on where these different types of enemies are throughout this area. And I felt like almost every combat room, if you will, quote unquote, was designed really well in that way. And I didn't get as fatigued by running into another group of enemies as I kind of did near the end of the first game.
Yeah, exactly. Because there was always a different order of people to kind of take out in different ways. And so like I said, it's kind of like a combat puzzle. You figure out like which guys you need to kill first that are obviously going to alert you to everybody else, and then you can just kind of pick them off accordingly. So yeah, I feel that they did a really good way of making sure that was fresh, making sure that was new. And I couldn't exactly say that about the first one. You know, I think obviously the first one had great combat for its time, but it doesn't have like near the depth that the second one does. And I feel like this second game takes all of the systems from the first one and only builds upon it to an even greater value.
Yeah, and the animation has improved.
Oh my god, the animation's amazing.
Some of the most, I think it's the best I've ever seen.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure.
Which just sells the combat that much more. All right, so let's jump ahead a little bit. There's only one thing I want to touch on, and then we got a big thing to talk about. So they get to the theater from here. The Pinnacle, it's Paramount. Yeah. They get to the Paramount. I'm calling it the Paramount, damn it. They get to the Paramount Theater.
They were like, don't sue us.
Yeah, that's why they were calling it the Pinnacle, I guess.
Yeah.
Everything is kind of like that. And really the main plot point here after they survive all this crazy stuff is Dina's like, I can't keep going because I'm pregnant. And that was a pretty big... What did you make of that from like a character development point of view and a... I'm trying to think of the words. I'm sorry. Character development, but also like, did you take that to mean something for the story, like outside of the literal fact that she was pregnant, or how did you take that choice, that creative choice?
So Dina kind of announcing that she was pregnant, one of the first things that came to mind was I started to see kind of where the story was going, where we're building kind of the parallels between Ellie and Abby. Because if you remember, of course, in the beginning of the game when we're introduced to Abby, Owen, which is her like male friend that she has, says that one of the members of the group is pregnant. And you kind of know that there's also this love triangle going on in that same group. So that's I remembered where I started kind of picking up the details of like, we're starting to get parallels between these two characters now, where, you know, Ellie's love interest is pregnant, and so it kind of adds another layer onto that. But I think I had the exact same reaction as Ellie when first hearing this news, because Ellie immediately thinks like, you know, what the hell? Like, you know, I get like she cares about me and she was kind enough to kind of make this journey with me and come to help me out. But now she's kind of become a little bit of a burden.
Yeah.
And so this is something that we have to plan for now. You know, we're down a person. There's no way that she can come help me with the rest of this journey. So now that we kind of have to establish the theater as like this base of operations, which carries us through like a good portion of the game. Yeah. So you're kind of wrestling with the fact that like, you know, Dina cares about Ellie and you feel that there's a love there and a romance, but at the same time you're like, oh man, like you kind of feel the same way as Ellie does, where you're like, this is going to become a burden now. This is going to become a problem. And it's not just her. It's not just herself that she has to really think about now. She has to think about this potential life, right, that she's carrying. So it's kind of an interesting predicament. And you're just like, oh, great, another problem to add on top of this this story.
Yeah,
so.
Those are great points. I didn't even actually... At the time, I did not think of the parallels as much as you did. So I thought that was really... When you told me that, you and I were texting basically the entire time we were playing this game.
Yeah.
Oh my God, you get here yet?
What did you think of this?
Yeah. But you kind of identified that more than me. I was so... What I was appreciating, and this might seem really obvious, but I think it's difficult to do right, is that Ellie's not this saint where she's immediately concerned about the baby and like the pregnancy and like she's pissed. She's pissed because she's jealous, right? It's Jesse's baby. It's like, we just finally got to the point where, you know, she wanted to be with Dina for so long, and they got there, and it was like they were going to go on this journey together, and it was really solidifying their relationship. And then it's like this happens, and it's like, well, it couldn't have been that much longer ago. It's just this huge reminder for her, you know, outside of all of this bullshit they're going through, right? They're already surviving this journey, and they're all the infected and the WLF and now the Sarah, all this stuff that's happening. It's like, regardless of that still is going to mean a lot. And now she's got this constant reminder of the fact that there's another person in Dina's life.
Right.
And it clearly bothers her, you know, no matter what she could tell herself that, oh, it was before she was with me or whatever. I mean, I would be really jealous too.
Yeah,
know?
absolutely.
So I like that they didn't try to make Ellie this like paragon of compassion.
Yeah, virtuous.
Yeah, it was, you know, she's kind of, well, whatever about it, you know, and I liked that. Right. I really appreciated that. So, all right. So let's move on to get to the theater. This is the next part of the game is maybe the most memorable, up there with a couple, you know, maybe the very end and the Joel death scene. This is the first flashback that we get with Joel and Ellie. and it's called The Birthday Gift, the name of the chapter. Let's not go beat for beat because we're trying to get through it, but we have to talk about this. Give me a few points from your perspective on this part, and like whatever you want to talk about of this flashback.
Yeah, I think it's easily one of the most heartwarming scenes of the entire game. I think it's easily the brightest spot. In a game that's super dark, I feel like this is the part of the story where there's the most levity and the most brightness out of everything. Ellie and Joel are kind of going to this museum, and Ellie's super interested in everything. And we're just getting a lot of context from the first game and building upon that relationship. You could tell by the age of the characters it doesn't take place like too far after the first game, in a sense.
And so the next year.
Yeah, something along those lines. But anyway, there's a really cool scene where they like go to the space part of the museum and they hop into like a space capsule, and he gives her this gift, which is like this tape recorder of the moon landing, I think it was, or the launch leading up to that. And it's a really heartwarming scene and just kind of builds upon the tragedy of Joel's death and just makes it so you're kind of ruminating back on it again.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think is exactly, and I think one of the most important parts of this scene is that even though Joel dies in the way that he does, I think that this scene was kind of needed to show the really good parts of Joel. Because the story doesn't make any bones about it by saying that Joel in some ways wasn't a good person.
Right.
But I feel like we get to see him at the height of his humanity. And it kind of softens the blow of his death a little bit for me. But I think it was an extremely important scene. It's probably one of the most important scenes of the game. And I think it was ultimately the thing that kind of helped me to accept Joel's death, or to kind of be at peace with it. That's kind of how I felt about it.
I think that's a really good kind of breakdown of the whole thing, and I like I like how our perspectives are a little different, because from the as I referenced, the 30,000 foot point of view, kind of looking down from a story structure idea, is like I was heartwarmed, but it's like this heartwarming thing that's got this constant shadow over it, right? I mean, because the reason we're seeing this is because I don't know. Do you think it's a reminder of how close they were, or what? I mean, it's like the whole time I was just thinking, she doesn't know yet. We knew that she didn't believe him at the end of the game, but they haven't had that conversation, and then they have such a good relationship. And I think this was a great way to get to know Ellie better too, because the Ellie that we're seeing now, the 19-year-old Ellie, is not who she's supposed to have been, right? In a perfect world.
Yeah.
But she's still a girl. Earlier on, she's still Ellie at that point, and you got the hat, and you're putting the hat on all the different dinosaurs, and Joel's like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And it's just really funny, and I did appreciate too the more specific moment you were talking about where they're in the space capsule. I loved the decision to be like, let's actually show her imagination.
Right.
So that everything starts rumbling and you're blasting off into space, and you see the reflection of space in the visor of the space helmet that she has on. So obviously, none of that's happening, but it's like we're in this imagination of this girl, and she's still a little girl with this imagination, and it's like, even this world can't take that away from a child, right?
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really important, and coming out of those memories is like kind of a shock, right? It's like being pulled right back into the awful, and and then you're immediately off to the next part, and it's just like, it was just such a relief there for a moment, and I think that's one of the strongest parts of the whole game.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then she wakes up and on to day 2, Seattle day 2, and I think it's important. I think what I was excited about with that whole part is, okay, this is how we're going to have Joel throughout the game, is these flashbacks. So like I could tell, okay, at the end of each day, we're going to get a big chunk flashback with them.
Yeah.
And it starts to do the Lord of the Rings thing where, and what I mean by that is the way those books are structured. So not the movie, but the way the books are structured is the timing is off. So that things that are happening on one half of the book are going to impact the way you believe things are happening in the next part of the book until you get back there, you start connecting dots and you go, oh, and that starts happening later in the game, and I'll touch on that again, but that's how the flashbacks start working. They start working toward the plot, and they're not just happy memories. They actually start working toward connecting some things near the end of the game, which I think was really cool. So we'll get to that. We're doing okay. We're an hour and 20 in, and we're about halfway through the game. Let's go quickly through this Seattle Day 2. I feel like we can do that. There's two major kind of sections to this. The next day, she goes to Hillcrest, but not before she... I can't quite remember how this works out, so you can help me, remind me. But she goes to
Sure.
She goes to Hillcrest because I believe Tommy is there, right?
Yeah, we're basically hot on Tommy's heels. I think she gets if I remember right, there's a radio broadcast that we get at the theater of like an unknown assailant, like a lone gunman who's been attacking WLF convoys, and so they triangulate the location to Hillcrest, which is like I think like a neighborhood or somewhere close by.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I got Dina. Dina's been hanging out in that projector room and kind of listening in on all the WLF chatter, and she's able to. That's right. So good. I couldn't quite remember what brought us there. I love this sequence. It feels very different because it's like a suburb.
Yeah.
It's kind of removed from downtown.
It's a proper neighborhood.
I love it's got this really misty, foggy, rainy, oppressive feel to it, and we also get introduced from a gameplay point of view. We get introduced to dogs.
Yeah.
You knew about this going into it. I did not. How do you feel about the dogs being in this? I mean, it's not like the first time we've had to kill a dog in a game, but
yeah,
there was something about in this one that was really difficult for me.
Yeah, certainly. I think in any game where you're killing a lovable pet in some ways is going to shake you to the core. But I think one of the interesting things that the dog introduces when it comes to gameplay is that now you don't really have the option to kind of stand still.
Right.
And I like that the dog keeps you moving through the different environments. So, of course, one of the things that they use the dog for is tracking your scent. And so you can see when you go into kind of that like, oh gosh, I'm forgetting like what the system is called, but basically that like Assassin's Creed, like,
yeah, it's like the listening.
See everything. Yeah, and like a listening mode where you're able to kind of see your own scent line and kind of track on your own where this dog is going to follow you to. So not only are you navigating levels of like tons of bad guys that are kind of patrolling the area, but you also have to keep moving or else the dog gets to you. And it also implements another combat puzzle, right? Where you have to figure out now if you get caught or if you go loud, who you're going to take out first. And, unfortunately that has to be the dog, right? So that way you don't have to stop. You could stop moving, basically. You don't have to keep traversing it. Because the more that you move throughout the level, the easier it is for you to get caught, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
So usually it's kind of a thing where, you have that order of operations again, right? Where you take out the dog first. You get the guys that are in like the upper levels because there's guys that are, kind of sniping at you from these rooftops and second floor windows. And then you can kind of take everybody else out on the ground floor. So that was one of the striking things to me, is that the dog implements kind of moving around more in combat. And, of course, easily this was the part of the game where I was like getting caught the most often.
Absolutely. Yeah, I got caught so many times in this part, and I'm pretty good at the stealth. I don't get caught that often, but I got caught a lot here. And I was just trying to learn to adapt to the dogs. I hated the dog. Every time I saw a dog, I was like, fuck.
Yeah.
I was so mad about it. So if really quickly too, it reminded me we were talking about like the listening mode.
Yeah.
One of the hardest things I think for a lot of games to get right is an upgrade system where every upgrade matters, and you can tell the difference.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like almost every upgrade available, like using the pills, is like I wanted all of them. I was having a really hard time deciding which one to do next because I wanted them all.
You're right.
Which is nice because sometimes you just get to them like I don't even care about this. Like this is not
Right.
this is not impacting my gameplay at all. I feel like they really do impact gameplay a lot, and I just wanted to throw that in there really quickly while I was thinking about the listening mode and all the different. You can start moving quicker when you're listening and all that stuff. So that was really nice.
Yeah, and that was a system that they upgraded from the first one too that I thought was way better implemented in this one. Because if I remember right, in this game in The Last of Us Part 2, there's a lot less of them to choose from, and so it makes it a little bit easier when it comes to selecting which one you want to do next. And they already have the most upgraded version pre-selected every time you move through the menu, so that way you're already automatically on the option that you want to choose, and that way you can kind of cycle through them, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, and you're quickly comparing which one, okay, this, or this. It's like, all right, cool. I want this one for sure, or whatever you want. Same goes for the weapon upgrade. That was in the first game, but I just think it was there's something incredibly satisfying about how they take the weapons apart.
Oh, it's so cool. I loved doing it. My favorite one especially was the sniper rifle, just the way that she like pops out the bullet, right?
Yes.
And then like cocks back the stock or whatever. Like, oh, it's so cool.
And there's like a little bit of an unrealistic speed to it that's really attractive. Yeah. It's like really aesthetically pleasing. Like yes.
Yeah, like Ellie's like this Rainbow Six operator. She's just able to like take apart these weapons, and it just looks so cool.
I mean, I buy that wholeheartedly, being Joel's daughter.
Definitely.
You know Joel was
yeah,
like,
right.
All right, this is a 38 raffle. I'm going to show you how to break this thing down. You know, like that. Yeah. There's no way. So I just wanted to touch on those things really quickly. Obviously, that's throughout the whole game, but I was reminded of those two things, and I thought those were just brilliantly input into the game, and it makes me again. Here we are talking about like, fuck, I want to go play again, do a new game plus.
Right.
And so we run into Jesse. So we think we're coming after Tommy, but it turns out it's Jesse out here.
Yeah.
And then this is actually one of my four, like, an action set piece, which we didn't get that many of in Last of Us, I felt like. Not, a few of them. But this was almost like an Uncharted style action set piece in this truck that they steal.
Yeah.
And you're driving around and you're like shooting. I like how they give you unlimited ammo during these things. I don't know if you noticed that.
Oh, yeah.
They take away the ammo. You don't have to worry about your ammo consumption. They're just like, shoot everything.
Oh, yeah. Well, because you're just getting attacked by this horde, right? And it's super stressful, and they're climbing through windows, and
And you're beating on runners and stuff that are reaching at you, and then when the clicker comes in through the front window, and she's just like unloading into its face, just shooting at it, and like it was so action oriented. And the game had been so kind of stealth and slow and explore, and it was just a really cool change of pace. The pacing in this game is just like perfect. As soon as I kind of felt like I might need something, I got it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that actually, so this whole thing leads us into another flashback where her and Joel, she's actually with Tommy at first, and Tommy's got the sniper rifle, and he's like shooting at like stray infected and stuff.
Yeah, you're like seeing one of the patrols that they're going on where it's Tommy and Ellie.
Right. So this was a really interesting. There's like a little mini story in here where they find like the kids that had run away, and this was a weird one. Not in a bad way. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and there was some action in it, and I wasn't expecting to get that from any of the flashbacks.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think about this one?
Yeah, this is it's interesting thinking back on this flashback because it's not exactly like out of place, but it's almost kind of like what I almost feel like people's idealized version of like The Last of Us 2 would have been.
Yeah, it's like this is all they wanted. They just wanted this the whole game.
Yeah, which is like, in some ways you're just kind of like, well, there's not really much of a differentiation. Yeah. But that was one of the first things I thought of once I finished that section, where I was like, that kind of seemed like what everybody's like I mentioned, what everybody's idealized version of like what like a The Last of Us 2 would have been.
And it was nice.
Had they not. Yeah, it was.
It was cool.
It was really cool.
It kind of felt like this is a weird reach back here, because it's weird to say it felt like, oh, this is nice, as we're like barely surviving, right?
Yeah.
But do you remember in the second Dead Space when you find the Ishimura and you have to go through this like Ishimura that was like in like repairs and stuff? Do you remember that?
You talking with like the black light and there's all the blood smeared all over?
Yeah,
or am I thinking?
Yeah, and it's like in construction, and there's like hallways, like they built like those circular medical plastic hallways through the Ishimura in Dead Space 2. But basically, you get to go back through the setting of the first game in the second game. Yeah, and it's like this crazy moment where it's like, like it had this great impact. I just love that moment, and that kind of reminded me of that. It was like, we get this little fleeting moment of like, here's the first game, and it's a wink from the developers, and it was nice. I enjoyed it. I was like, this is really cool. We have this kind of a Last of Us 1 throwback flashback.
Yeah, it was the familiar, but in like a new setting.
Right, exactly. And I think that's important. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, too, I think one of the things that, if we're also talking about in the ways that it kind of relates to The Last of Us 1, obviously towards the end of the encounter, you fight a bloater.
Yeah.
And let me just say, the bloaters in this game are like on steroids. They're like way harder. They're way scarier. They bust through walls to like charge you.
They bust through walls. Right? They destroy their own. There are times where I'm like running from one, and if one of the runners gets in the way, they just like whop. The runner goes flying and dies, and I love that.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I that was one of the things that struck me about this encounter, is I was like, this is a bloater? Like, Jesus Christ. Like, yeah,
they run
like
now.
They definitely they're more advanced, that's for sure. They're becoming sentient.
So that was pretty cool. There's so much here. I mean, we could be here all day, man. I'm gonna do a little bit of hopping here because I want to make some progress, because we're only about halfway through the game.
Yeah.
Following that, we meet the Seraphites for the first time in the woods, and they start whistling, and that shit was like really scary. Not in like a horror game way, but it was just, I remember that being very intense the first time you meet them.
It's unsettling.
And they whistle back and forth to each other, and like when you kill one of them stealthily and they're whistling, they don't whistle back. They come over to where they were, and I thought that was, the AI was pretty. Sometimes AI is a little dumb, and I think it just needs to be in stealth games, because if the AI was as smart as a person, stealth games wouldn't exist, in my opinion.
Yeah, you'd never make it through a level.
Sometimes they got to be kind of dumb. I like killing dumb AI. I don't care, as long as it's not so bad that it pulls you out of the experience. And I thought that was actually an example of good AI. They're like whistling, and they'll find where the person who isn't whistling is and go over there and check it out, and that was pretty cool. And this is all on the way. Basically, we're trying to get to the hospital. So it's really mainly just combat. Ellie's by herself, so there's not a lot of dialogue. So let's just get to the hospital. She goes through a lot to get there, but there's some really great sequences, some great combat sequences. But we get to the hospital, and we're looking for Nora. We kill a girl who's playing Vita. Remember that?
Yeah, right. Shout out to Sony's last handheld.
Yeah, that was really cool. She's playing Hotline Miami on the Vita, and we cut her throat. Ellie tries to spare her, all right, but it doesn't work out. And when you kill her, and Ellie, this is like a part for Ellie, she kills her, and she kills her so brutally. She sticks this knife in her throat and kills her. And then she looks at her and she goes, "That was stupid."
Yeah, just gargling on her own blood. You're like, Jesus.
And Ellie has nothing to say. She looks down and goes, "That was stupid." It kind of reminded me of Tess.
Right, yeah.
That's what you have to say after that. All right. So moving through that, we get through the hospital and we find Nora. And this part gets pretty crazy. Do you remember how this all goes down?
Yeah. So you take a bunch of effort, right, to get to like the top level or whatever of the hospital, and you find Nora, and I remember you confront her, and I remembered this was in one of the trailers I think they showed at one point in time, where it ends at the part where they kind of start in one of the trailers they released a while ago, which was interesting. But yeah, you basically confront Nora, and Nora kind of remembers who you are, right? Because she was one of the people that was there when Joel had died. And so there's like this one dialogue exchange where they're talking about it, and she remembers Ellie, and then she says something like, Joel died like a bitch or something like that. And I remember just being like, oh, you're dead.
Oh,
like,
yeah. And you are Ellie in that moment. Like, Ellie gets so pissed. And it's like, oh, don't bite on that bait. But how do you not?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I easily fell for it. I was like, come here, you, as we're just running through this hallway, parkouring over hospital beds.
Yeah, back to that design where it makes you feel like you know what you're doing, even though it's actually just brilliant background design that's telling the subconscious of your brain what to do.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, I like that right in the opening part of that where Ellie got her gun trained on her, and she's like, you remember me? And then she doesn't say anything. He's like, yeah, you remember me.
Yeah.
It's like, man, Ellie is...
such a badass.
Oh, man. I would not want to be on the other end of that. And eventually...
and then, of course... I was going to say, then, of course, we get to the part where we finally do track her down, right? And then she accidentally runs into the room with the spores, and she starts, like, being overcome by the spores. And I just expected Ellie to just kind of leave her there and, like, let her suffer. And then we get this scene where the game, like, makes you just wail on Nora. There's like, you hit the triangle or the square button and just, like, rip into her. And it easily is another, again, one of the most brutal parts of the game.
Yeah, it's hard,
where
man.
you're actually physically taking place in the violence.
It's hard for me, it's just hard because I don't want that for Ellie, right? Like, I'm just like, this was not supposed to happen, Right. You weren't supposed to have to. This is why you wanted to die to save everyone.
Yeah.
Joel saved your life so that this is what happened. You know what I mean? It's just depressing to me. She's losing everything that made her that wonderful little girl that we knew, and becoming Joel.
Yeah, and now we're it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition, right? Because we're seeing, like, humanity go from not really being there in the first game to being kind of restored in Joel by the end of this game. And then I feel like this is one of the moments in the game where we're starting to see the humanity fade in Ellie.
Yeah.
And start to kind of grow this obsession with tracking down these people and killing them. So it's interesting how the trajectory of the first game kind of carries us into this one.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It's... That was a really difficult part for me. I felt really bad for her, and she's not she's not excited about it. When she gets back, Tommy is there now, right? Because now they're all together. Because Tommy, does Tommy? I can't remember how that happens because Tommy is at the theater.
Yeah, I think he eventually meets up with them at some.
Yeah, I can't remember how that all happens, but at the end of this whole sequence, they're all together, and that's kind of. Oh man, that's kind of when Ellie decides she needs to go to the aquarium. Remember, maybe that's where she finds Tommy. And apologies for not remembering. It's just been it all. I played it all so quickly. I got through it all so much.
Yeah, from the time we're recording this, I think we finished the game like a week and a half ago or so.
But she finds out. She made her talk. That's what she's saying to. That's what she's saying to Dina, is that she made her talk, and she's not happy about it, right? It clearly follows her.
Right.
And finds out that Abby hangs out at the aquarium a lot. And that's when we get to the aquarium. That was a really rough part, too. I mean, that was really scary, like sneaking through the aquarium, because like, they kind of make you think that Abby's going to be there.
Yeah, you have like this anticipation, right? Where you're like thinking that there's going to be some like grand conflict here. And you have to kind of like stealthily move your way through basically what we come to find out is like a totally empty aquarium. Yeah. So you're kind of like, you have this tension and this like anticipation the entire time that like shit is gonna go down, but you don't know like when or how. So it makes it way more nerve-wracking in retrospect to like go through that section.
Yeah, it does. Especially the first time you're playing it. I was like, oh, stop making so much noise. Abby's going to hear you. We got to get her.
Right, exactly.
But it turns out she's not there. And it's just Owen and Mel, who at this point we don't know that well, but a little bit, from the beginning of the game.
Yeah, we know that there's some kind of, right, we know as far as like there's like the love triangle between.
That's about it.
Yeah. That's about the extent of it.
And this part was especially depressing to me because Ellie's like trying to be like Joel. And she's trying to do the, you point to this,
the interrogation
on the map,
trick.
and you point to this on the map and all that. It's just like not working. And she's super nervous and she doesn't really want to kill these people. And then everything just goes to hell.
Mm-hmm.
And she shoots Owen and ends up killing Mel and discovering that she's pregnant. Oh, that's when we meet Tommy.
Yeah.
Tommy and they come in and find her after she kills Mel. So
yeah. She kind of has this like mental, after finding out that Mel is pregnant and that she ended up killing her, she kind of like has this mental breakdown, and that's kind of like a really depressing revelation and kind of like a turning point in the story where you're like, again, it's just darkness on top of darkness, and
it just gets
misfortune.
worse and worse as we bury ourselves in here. And that kind of leads to the end of Act 2, I guess you'd call it, which is when we get back to the theater, and we have some moments where her and Tommy and Jesse and everyone's kind of able to regroup and catch each other up on what's been happening and console each other. He's trying to make Ellie feel better about what happened. Until eventually it breaks scene and we wake up with Ellie. Now, was there another flashback in that point? I don't believe so, but I can't quite remember if there was a... There is another flashback.
No.
Yes, it is. Yeah, there's a flashback.
Oh, there is.
It's but you're playing as Abby.
Oh, that's
This
right.
is
Yeah,
where we
because
discover something pretty important.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. You were going to say something there.
Oh no, I was gonna say I think like also once we get to this flashback with Abby too, I think that this is, I think I would say like technically halfway through the game.
Yeah, it is.
Or something like
It's
that.
about halfway through. So we have this flashback with Abby. She's young, right? So it says 4 years earlier, and she's looking for her dad, and she eventually finds him, and he's trying to save a zebra, and he's kind of this goofy dude, and then we find out that she's dreaming. Abby is dreaming because it ends with her in the hallway discovering what Joel did, and we find out that her dad was the surgeon that Joel killed at the end of The Last of Us when he was saving Ellie.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty
crazy revelation.
Did you expect that?
I
mean,
no.
I think we both already said that we thought that these were ex-Fireflies trying to get revenge for what happened, but not from this perspective.
No, I remember I had the assumption that either Abby or somebody in the group was maybe related to somebody who Joel had killed in the aftermath of that.
Yeah,
so like as they're escaping the hospital, like a soldier or something. Definitely didn't expect it to be the surgeon, but it adds this crazy element to the narrative where you're like,
is Abby even wrong?
It just... Yeah, exactly. And this is where you really start to have the moral conundrum of like the parallel between these two characters and how similar they are and sort of their motivations and their trajectories, really.
Yeah.
It's super interesting. And it's especially interesting, I'm sure it'll make playing through the first one even more interesting, right? Because you'll get to that scene
and you're gonna
you'll know exactly what's happening. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this game is going back and still improving upon the impact of playing the first game, which is pretty incredible. And then we get out of that, and I thought that was at the time I thought that was a weird place for that flashback. I was like, what? To find out that she has broken into her and Lev, who we don't know yet, has broken into the theater, and she has Tommy hostage and gets Ellie to get rid of her gun and delivers maybe my favorite, one of my favorite lines of the whole game. which is where she points the gun at Ellie and says, "I gave you a chance and you've wasted it."
Yeah.
And I really liked that. I was like, first of all, Laura Bailey's delivery of that line is incredible, but just
It's so
how
good.
true that is in a way. I mean, but we're at the same time, we're with Ellie, we're like, fuck that, we're gonna get revenge. Like, you killed Joel. And so it's weird, we're possessing these two truths that how can they both be true if they contradict each other? And it's like, well, that's life. That's called nuance.
Right, exactly.
And then it goes black, and I did not expect this to happen, but I think we're gonna have to call it there because we're at 2 hours.
Yeah, there might be a part 2.
There's going to have to be a part 2. I mean, just from the perspective of the fact that I have to fit this, I have to upload this to our, and it has to fit in our monthly storage that I pay for.
Right.
And it's not going to fit if we do 4 hours, and we're only halfway through this game.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of game left to get
And
through,
I don't want to skip on anything. And so I know we did not plan this, Taylor, but I was just thinking, I was like, holy shit, we're at 2 hours and we're only halfway through the game.
Yeah.
So as much
it's a lot to talk about.
As much as we talked about 5 minutes a segment, I knew that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, no. Well, we want to do right by the game as well. There's so much in this game to talk about.
I think it's one of the most important games for the medium. Ever,
Absolutely.
For a lot of different reasons, and I don't want to miss this moment to talk about.
No, it's so dense with detail that like we definitely need a second part to really talk about things in more detail, because Abby's portion of the game and this section of the game is where you start to see these parallels expanded upon more, and where the narrative really takes these revelations become more powerful in the second half.
And what perspective really means for our worldview and the way we see other people in our life and everything. It gets pretty existential. So sorry to ambush you with the end there. We weren't planning on that, but it's just kind of the way it went. So we will continue this with a part 2 for The Last of Us Part 2. We will finish up our reactions to the game next time on the show. If we have time, we'll try and get it done this week, and just that way we can get into next week and have this kind of behind us. But thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to write in if you're listening. We can take some questions or whatever at the end of the episode, perhaps. And thank you all for listening. And Taylor, thanks, man. I really appreciate you flowing with me on that. We did not plan that. That was just, I kind of just dropped that because I realized what time it was and how long we've been doing this. So part 2.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thanks everybody, and we'll see you guys in part 2.
All right, catch you soon. Bye-bye.